Hello, I'm Jen Palmar. I'm a clinical psychologist who specializes in working with kids, teens, and adults with developmental differences. So a lot of my work is in therapy. I do some testing too, but this is one of my favorite things to talk about. Also just set some expectations beforehand. This is a huge topic that we could go into for a very long time. So my goal is to kind of just give an overview, some different ways of thinking about it, and talk about how to find resources that can support with this, is that if this is something that your child needs support with. So we'll go from there. And of course, these are, okay. So again, this is more for educational purposes. Definitely seek out further guidance with some of these behaviors, because a lot of the behaviors we're going to talk about can be safety concerns too. So I like to start with talking about why this is important. A lot of the times when families come to me, the child is super distressed, really anxious, having a hard time, very overwhelmed, and then parents are like, I've tried everything. All the parenting strategies that I have are the ones that work with my other kids aren't working. And I'm not quite sure what to do, or I've tried everything and nothing's working. This is why this field kind of exists, so that we have more specialized supports to help with this. So first, let's kind of talk about what I mean by challenging behaviors. Overall, I mean the ones that are unsafe for your child, or unsafe for the people around them. So aggression, hitting, pinching, kicking, destruction of property, things like this, headbanging, self-injury, running off, elopement, all these kinds of things. We also have behavior differences, which are things that contribute to challenging behaviors. So a lot of behavior differences, and there's a bunch of examples of them here. So impulsivity, hyperactivity, different communication styles, and so forth, are really common in individuals who are neurodivergent. So individuals with diagnoses such as intellectual disability, autism, ADHD, and so forth. And that can really just change the way that they act, and they act in ways that may be unexpected or hard for us to understand. So these things are not problematic or bad in themselves, but sometimes they can be difficult because the world isn't set up really to accommodate these things. So that can lead to a lot of challenges. So when that does happen, there can be a lot of misunderstanding, frustration, stress for the child and for us. So that is why these are kind of really important things to think about too when we're talking about challenging behaviors. So I think there's kind of 3 steps that you can do as parents to work on this. One is getting more information about different tools, shifting how you're approaching it, and getting connected to the right resources. So we're going to kind of go through those in that order. The first one is, if you're looking for information, I would first look to disability self-advocates, neurodiversity movement, to see a lot of what individuals say has been helpful for them. If you're looking into research, these are the specific terms I would look into. The terms themselves are, some of them, like parent training, are very oddly named, but this is what they're called in the research, and this is what's connected to strategies that help decrease behaviors in individuals who have developmental differences. So cognitive behavior therapy, behavior psychology, parent training, and then really connecting it to specific mental health or developmental diagnoses, so like intellectual disability, autism, ADHD, these things. Obviously, talk to your child's providers. Also, a lot of hospitals have resource libraries, and the providers within that hospital advise what they have there, and you can access a lot of those for free. I know locally, Advocate, Aurora, Lutheran General has a resource library that has a bunch of really good research about this stuff too. So Yeah, Kathy Smart is great. That's exactly who I got this information from. But yeah, look into that as well. Okay. So let's get into kind of why behavior is happening too. The biggest thing to keep remembering is it's happening because it works for them. They're doing it because for some reason, what they're doing is getting them what they need or want, or maybe it's just getting them an opportunity to express how they're feeling even. To us as adults, a lot of the times behaviors don't make sense. And it's like, this doesn't make sense that you're hitting or pinching or running off. I don't understand why. To them, it's working. And that's one of the biggest things we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about behavior, is shifting to figure out why is it working for them. This is the key to all behavior strategies. You can use all the behavior strategies out there. They're not going to work if it's not connected back to why it's happening. And I think a lot of the times when I have families come in and say things such as, we've tried everything with all kinds of providers, oftentimes this connection to why it's happening is what's missing. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to figure out the why. So the first thing is there's this iceberg metaphor visual that we always use, which is what we see as the behavior. And then underneath are all different reasons why the behavior could be occurring. So it could be social skill differences, not having the communication tools that you need to communicate, feeling hungry, tired, feeling sick and not being able to tell us that, maybe feeling really thrown off by some sensory things around you. There's lots of different reasons why that behavior might be happening. So we kind of have to play detective and figure out why. And again, when individuals have these differences with how their body works, how their brain works, how their body responds to things, their behaviors aren't going to look like we'd necessarily expect, because they're going to be more stressed out, because again, things aren't set up to best support them. So it's just going to put them under a lot more stress and make it hard for them to stay calm and regulate and respond in the quote unquote most appropriate way. So this is why, again, we see a lot of those behaviors too. This is just another iceberg metaphor. This is from a book that I'll kind of reference at the end, where it talks about what we're seeing on top, and then underneath is all the different things that could be happening. So this one talks about different sensations, emotions, developmental level, thoughts, all these different things too. Okay, so when we're trying to figure out the why, there's lots of ways we can approach this. Historically, we did a lot of like, what's the function of the behavior, and talked about that, which is important, but I don't think it's quite as nuanced as we can get into. I think what I would do is just go through and ask a lot of questions. I have a whole list of these here. I'll read through some of them, but you can also kind of look through them too. We're trying to gather a lot of information to figure out what possibly could be contributing to it. So we need to put away our assumptions about why they're doing it, about why someone would act this way, and really go through and rule out a lot of things. Is there a safety concern? Do they want something? Is it every time I take something away from them that they get upset? Did they see something they really liked outside earlier and we didn't get to get it, so now they're running to go get that? We need to really go through and ask a lot of questions and try to determine what could be behind that behavior. I'm going to go through some more of the examples. There's lots of different things. Again, sometimes it might be because we want something or trying to get out of a certain situation because they feel uncomfortable, or maybe it's a new situation and that can be really intimidating. And so trying to even just avoid going into that situation in the first place, that can lead to a lot of things that we would call behaviors. There's also sensory reasons. Sometimes kids feel dysregulated or individuals feel dysregulated, so they might act in unexpected ways to kind of show us that. Or they might be having a hard time calming down. All of these things are reasons. So really going through all of these different reasons to figure out where it's coming from is going to be very important. There's a lot of tools we can use for this. This is from the book that I'll show you all at the end. It's kind of a blank iceberg form that you can fill in and kind of figure out what's going on. Another thing that I think is super helpful, and definitely this is something where I would write down some of these questions or get a picture of this one if you're really trying to figure out some behaviors, because it can kind of organize our thoughts. It helps us kind of step back, step out of our role as family member or parent or whatever that is, and whatever your role is, and get an idea of what's going on from a slightly more objective standpoint. So what we would do with something like this is you'd choose a behavior that's challenging, so hitting or banging head or running off, and every time it happened, you'd fill out a line on this form. So you'd have information about where it was happening, who was there, what was happening right before, what the child would have been seeing happening right before, what happened after, how did we respond, and how did everyone feel during this too. And after you get like several lines of information, we can start to see patterns. So we can see, okay, every time this happened right before, we were in a loud place. Or every time this happened right before, we took something away. Or right before there was a big transition. We want to try to find patterns. That's part of the why, right? Finding those patterns is part of figuring out the why of why a behavior is happening. I think what else? We can also look and see what we did after and see if it worked or not, right? Maybe we took away something after they got upset, or maybe we took them to a separate room and gave them some calm down time. And we can kind of see, okay, every time this happens, we're responding this way. Is there a pattern with that too? And we just want to be curious and try to figure out, are there patterns? What do these patterns mean? What can we try to change in these patterns to make it different? Another really important thing too is, again, we really need to check in how we're feeling during this too, because I can say all this as a therapist. I can be a little bit more calm and neutral in situations. When it's a family member, that's not super easy. And so it's really important to kind of track that as well, to see if we need to also kind of help ourselves feel like we have the tools we need to calm down and really address this. Because challenging behavior is extremely hard. It's hard even when we're calm. If we're upset too, we're not going to be able to really do a good job addressing it. So it's important to be tracking that too. Another benefit of using something like this, and again, you can write down these questions. You can also look up like an ABC chart is what this can be called, versions of this. If you are working with a provider, using something like this and going in and showing them, they can also help you kind of untangle what's going on too. You can give this to a therapist, any other mental health provider, show school. They are also trained to be able to look at this and kind of support in figuring out what patterns are too. Schools use these a lot too. Okay. Okay, so first we're figuring out why, gaining more information through research, through letting our child kind of teach us about why and what's happening. Then we need to shift our approach and figure out what we need to do. And there's kind of, I'm breaking it down to 3 big ways we can make changes. One is changing the environment, which is usually a really big piece. The second one is figuring out what skills do we need to teach. Sometimes we assume that, no, they know how to do that. They're just not doing it in this situation. Often we need to really, really break down some of the things we're expecting them to do and step by step teach them, which we'll talk about too. And the last one, again, is we need to modify how we're responding and really monitor how we're responding. Sorry, it's going in and out. I'm not sure why. Okay. Okay, so talking about changing the environment, there's lots of different ways to do this. One of the first ways is even just thinking about how different classrooms are set up, right? When we have special education classrooms, they're automatically already set up differently. We want to think about in all these different situations where behaviors are occurring, do we need to set up the room differently? And that doesn't mean make it like a classroom, but it means thinking what we need to shift to make it more appropriate and to think about if we can set up things in any way that'll prevent the behavior. One of the very important things about preparing is out of all the research, we have stuff that we can do before behavior happens, when it's happening, and after. The stuff we can do before is going to be a lot more helpful, because if you can stop a behavior before it starts, that's much easier. Once it's already happening, it's really hard to kind of get things to settle back down. So a lot of these steps are really important, because if we can kind of make the behavior less likely to happen and meet some of those needs of the kid, set things up so that they're more conducive to what we want them to be doing or focusing on, that can really be helpful. So part of this is setting up expectations. Yeah, we can verbally talk to them about that, but also putting stuff into visual form, right? So it's not just us saying things. So putting pictures of maybe what the schedule is for that situation or what rules are, things like this. If we think there's a sensory concern, trying to remove as much of that as we can. Doing anything we can do to make specific activities more predictable. So if you're doing that form from earlier and you notice that every time it happens, they're in a particular place or they're doing a particular activity, maybe we need to kind of make a schedule and write out what all the steps are of that activity. Or make a schedule, these are all the different things we do in this room. Try to do things to make it more predictable. Take the things you'd want to say verbally, put them into a visual form. This helps make sure that we're not missing a learning piece to it, or they are fully understanding the expectations, and it also kind of takes it off of us to just be like, we're telling you what to do. It's like, hey, go check what the rules are over there too. So that can be another helpful thing to use. Other things, incorporate if we're trying to teach a particular skill or work on a particular behavior, figure out ways to pull in your child's interest as well. We want to try to make, when we're working on these things, they're not super fun. We want to make them more fun and kind of help them learn these skills through play. See if there's anything else I want to go through on here. Other things that can be super helpful that you wouldn't necessarily expect that we can do beforehand is setting specific times each day to engage in child-led play. There's a lot of research on this. It's called special time. If we're having a lot of behavior challenges, having set times during the day where we just have very undivided attention for 5, 10, max 15 minutes can really actually make behaviors go down without us even putting any specific behaviors plans in place. So that can be another helpful thing to do beforehand. Okay, I'm going to show you just some tools, more tools that we can use. These are a bunch of different things. The left one is called a reinforcement inventory. Again, we want to try to pull ourselves out of parent mode or caregiver mode and kind of step back and try to find more objective ways to learn about what the kid needs. So a reinforcement inventory has us go through and just rate a whole bunch of things about what they might like or not like, and that kind of can help us plan what to do going forward. Again, that is something else that a lot of therapists will use. A similar thing is more of a preferences form, which this will also be in the book that I'll have at the end. And those are just very useful tools we can use on our end to help us prepare for different situations. Maybe we remember that there's a lot of things that our kid really, really likes, and we can keep those with us kind of in case of emergency situations or in case we kind of need to use them to help them feel more comfortable or feel motivated. And then other things are just schedules, just like how they have at school and in classrooms. It's figuring out what schedules we can put into different situations. So I just put a basic schedule there. Okay, next we want to do a lot of teaching. I'm not going to go too in detail on this page because I'm going to show more examples instead, but it's really important, whatever skill we're teaching, to teach it, model it, so us do it ourselves and kind of highlight that we're doing what we want them to do, practice it, and give them a lot of praise. So again, a lot of times there's a skill missing or not developed, or they're just understanding something in a different way, and we want to be able to teach that. So that's a lot of the times our functional communication tools, AAC, sign language, work with speech therapy comes in, is we want to make sure they have the tools to communicate. A lot of behavior comes back to them not being able to communicate what they want or need. So that's a really important part that we need to teach, model, practice, help them learn. Sometimes it's they need more sensory tools. We need to really teach them how to use that. We can't just kind of give them sensory headphones or a chew toy. We need to practice it with them, show them how we can use it, walk them through it, break it down step by step. Use pictures if we need to, like I use this for this long, or if I'm upset, I use this, stuff like that. If we're trying to teach a task like sitting at the table, drinking water, going to the bathroom, getting dressed, we'd also put those out into steps too. So we want to kind of try to have pictures for these different steps so we can really practice teaching it. If we're teaching a skill, there's a few really important things to remember. One, praise any effort during it. The other one is make sure we're practicing when we're calm. So for example, I have a lot of parents talk about going to the grocery store as a skill they want to be able to teach. You can't practice this during your weekly grocery store trip. It's not going to work because everyone's stressed. We're thinking about everything you need to get. We're planning for the week. It's not the time to do it. So in that example, you would pick a time during the week where you're going to go in and get one thing and then leave. And that's when you would kind of practice those steps. Similarly, if there's a certain time of the day where if we're talking about mealtime being hard, we wouldn't start this at mealtime. We would pick another time during the day to do like a 5-minute snack or something and practice whatever skills you're trying to teach there. So you really need to also really break down the situation and figure out step by step how is going to be best to teach it. When you're teaching, you want to pull in all kinds of tools. A lot of schools already have a lot of these visuals in place, so always ask schools, what visuals do you use that I can use at home? Because then you don't have to develop these yourself. This can be pictures, schedules, lists, visuals. Sometimes they also write stories. Kids really like this. If there's something you have to teach them, definitely having them sit down and help you pick pictures for a story can be very, very motivating and exciting for them too. Or you can include their pictures, which kids love. And again, you want to make this fun. We don't want it to be like, oh, you're going to work now, you're going to have to do all these tasks. You want to kind of teach them these things through play. So again, kind of going back when we're breaking down those steps, maybe we would find a smaller time frame to practice it in, or maybe we would find some toys that would be similar to it and practice it with toys first. So you want to really break down these things to teach. These are just a bunch of different visuals. The key to a lot of the visuals when we're teaching is to use visuals to make the start point and end point and the steps clear. So to us, a lot of the times, the steps and tasks are clear. We're like, well, you get dressed, you put your clothes on, they're all on, you're done. That's not as clear to individuals who learn differently. So you want to do things that show clear steps. So like on this one here, there's a clear start point, steps, and then it ends. If there's not something that's that concrete or structured, you can use more like a visual timer. And that's an app you can get on your phone. That's a really good one too. And that kind of shows them, okay, we're doing this for this much time, and then it's done. Or we're gonna have to wait for this long, and waiting's really hard, but we're only waiting for this long. So these are all ways to kind of just really help you better teach these skills and show them when stuff is going to start and end. We have a augmentative communication device, first then, and also just kind of, if we don't have any of these tools with us and we have to do something, we can say, okay, we're gonna do this 4 more times. Okay, we need to wait 5 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We wanna really think about ways to break it down and structure it so the endpoint for whatever we're working on is clear. And these are just for older kids too, like having visuals so they can tell us how they're feeling, choose what they need to do, writing out rules. This is for a kid I worked with who kept stealing the neighbor's mail, opening it because he loves Amazon very, very, very much. So just writing it out, and he helped pick pictures for it and write out the rules too. So again, we're teaching stuff that he knew it probably wasn't the best thing to do, but he needed it really written out and explained in this way. Okay, this last one is super important, so modifying how we're approaching it too. So when I say caregiver, I also mean teacher, I mean therapist. We want to try to go from our natural reaction to kind of more responding and choosing how we're responding. Again, this is easy from a therapist's point of view. When it's your family member, this part's really hard because we have natural reactions because they're our child, our sibling, and so forth. So this is something to really monitor. One thing that can help is come up with a plan beforehand of how you're going to respond. This makes it predictable for the kid because they're going to be like, oh, they always respond in the same way. You're kind of building trust that every time you do this, like, yeah, this is hard and something we're going to work on, but also I'm going to respond in this way. And it also gives us a roadmap because when challenging behaviors are happening, we're probably going to feel really dysregulated too and not be sure what to do, and might kind of just try a lot of things or be like, it's not working, I'll switch to this. If we really write out a plan, it can kind of give us a guide map what to say. A plan can also include, what should I say? What am I going to try saying? How am I going to help them with calming down? Stuff like this. And whatever the plan has in it, one, it should have ways for us to stay calm. It should also remind us not to talk a lot. It's okay to talk to kids about their behaviors, but not when it's happening. It's not just like us, we don't take in a lot when we're mad. Kids don't either. So we want to kind of separate that out. So kind of trying to lower our reaction, lowering how much we're talking, and really focusing on staying calm and helping our kid get calm. And then we can kind of move forward with that, whatever the next steps would be. Another thing that can be helpful to put in your plan is just remind yourself to kind of really pay attention to details that are going on so that you can write them in a tracker or something later and kind of step back to that pattern. Okay, I'll go into a few more specific strategies later, but before I do that, I wanted to just talk about what supports to get to help with all of this. Because these are some general ideas and like an intro to how to approach this, but we also probably want to get connected to some providers to help. So if we think communication's a big contributor to why behaviors are happening, we want to go to speech therapy right away and get some more effective communication in place. If we think there's a lot of sensory aspects, or maybe we need more help with activities of daily living, we look at occupational therapy. And then we want a mental health provider, I'll talk more about on the next slide. Also look into multidisciplinary teams where they can all work together. A lot of the times when a kid has some challenging behaviors, having all the providers be able to work on it at the same time is really helpful. Also, a lot of states have crisis teams if behaviors are very significant. That's usually, you can get funding through that through the Department of Disability. In Illinois, it's the SST via PUNS. Psychiatry can be helpful. Then also, of course, always connect to parent support groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups for parents around neurodiversity and behavior management and stuff to look into. Okay, when you're looking for mental health providers, if this is something you think you're going to be looking for, this is another slide I take a picture of. I can also share slides, however, too. These are the different providers you can look for. I again wrote out those specialties that you should look for looking for it, because psychology and therapy fields, I think, are just extremely hard to navigate because we're confusing and we're not set up in a very organized way. And one psychologist will not be comfortable with this, where others will be. So you want to, again, look for those terms: behavior psychology, CBT, parent training, and then specific diagnoses. This is a side of like kind of best practice things I would look for too, or kind of advocate for your kid. You should be involved in treatment. This should not be a case if you're working on challenging behaviors where your kid individually works one-on-one with the therapist on the behaviors. If the behaviors are happening at home, everyone needs to be working together on them, and the therapist should be extremely focused on helping, work on them in session, but then helping you get them to work at home too. Another big part should be that the therapist should be really, really focused on building a relationship with the patient and making it fun. If you have a kid who is refusing therapy, and I think I got this in one of the questions that was written into, the therapist needs to step back and reset their goals. Therapy should not be something that they're having more behaviors with, going to every day too. So really stepping back, building that relationship, pulling in fun stuff, and gradually working towards these goals would be important. You want them to be collaborating with everyone, school, using visuals, and really kind of having specific goals that they can measure over time. Okay. I'm going to give very brief answers to these, and then I will make sure that these slides are available somehow, even if it's just by emailing me. I'm happy to share them. So for aggression and self-injury, the key to every one of these things, and some of these are related to what you wrote in about, is to figure out why it's happening. I put examples of strategies, but none of them are going to be helpful if it's targeting the wrong why. Because all of our research is like, okay, if this is your why, this is a strategy that's effective. So if we don't have that first part, it's not going to work. So first we need to figure out why it's happening. Then if it is happening, there's different things we can do at each of those levels I talked about. We can prepare visuals. If we have a sensory thing that's triggering behavior, set up the room so that it's more comfortable. We can have tools available to block the behavior. For head banging, you can have a pillow on hand. Put it between them and the wall or them and the floor if we need to. That way we don't have to put hands on. We don't have to do those things, but we're still doing something to keep them safe. Have distraction tools on hand. Going back to that reinforcement inventory from earlier where we're really figuring out what they're motivated by, have a bunch of those in your bag so that if we need kind of a distraction in a situation we think might cause to some more behaviors, we can kind of pull it out and kind of keep them occupied too. Outside of that, we can teach a similar behavior. For hitting, pinching, those kinds of things, a lot of times we go to high five first. We're still hitting, but it's in a socially appropriate way and a safer way, right? So really over-teaching that over time and practicing it together and really praising them for that often can kind of just naturally make the more aggressive behavior go down. We can also, again, teach them ways to more safely get what they need. If we know why they're hitting, we can if they are hitting because they want food, teach them how to use their device to say, I want food, or I need a break, or whatever they may need. And then also, we really want to monitor our response. Aggression and self-injury are extremely hard not to react to because it's scary. We want to at least think about how we're responding and if it's at all seems to be contributing to any of the pattern that's going on. Sometimes aggression and self-injury can start as more of a sensory thing, like kids are doing it and kind of experimenting with how their body works, and they're like, hey, that feels good, that's pressure. And then over time, it can become more connected to, oh, hey, this kind of gets a cool reaction from people around me. And we want to really watch that and see if we can change that. This is an interesting thing about kids is for adults, when we want attention, we generally want positive attention. Kids seem to care more about how the magnitude of the attention, not necessarily if it's positive or negative. So if we're going, oh no, don't do that, oh my gosh. Sometimes kids are like, that's really funny actually. And then they'll do it more often. So if we see that pattern happening, we need to think, how am I reacting? How can I react differently? Can I just calmly be like, we're gonna sit down, or, oh, we need to calm down, trying to respond in a more neutral way. Okay. For elopement, I could talk about this for a long time. This is a huge area in the field. The bottom line, though, is I would go to the National Autism Association's Big Red Safety Toolbox. I use this for most patients, and it has a ton of details about how to kind of prepare for kids who are more likely to run off or elope. So it has ID bands, it has tracking devices for kids who do this a lot. It has a safety plan. Also, they have like cards you can fill out and give to local law enforcement so they recognize who your child is. That is a very important piece to use. This is something I really think is important to work on with a provider because it's hard. We have to teach things that are not easy to teach, like waiting. teaching a kid to wait is being like, stand there and don't do anything, which isn't really easy. So this is something that's really good to work with someone. We also can use communication, teach them to ask if they need a break. If they're running off a lot, put times in their day where they can run in safe places, because we still need to kind of give them opportunities to do that. And then again, we need to modify our reaction. I've had so many kids who run because they really like the reaction from parents, but it's also really hard not to react when your kid's running off too. So this is why I think this is a really important one, to start with the big red safety box and then look to getting some more support around it too. And these are some other just quick areas. One is for repetitive behaviors. That was a question that came up. First, you need to figure out if it's safe or not safe. If it's safe and it's not causing impairment, it's okay. That's just the way their body works differently. So like stimming, not making eye contact, even though that's not a repetitive behavior, but stimming, stuff like that, is okay as long as it's not causing impairment. If it's not safe, we need to figure out that why, then figure out what to use. A go-to for a lot of repetitive behaviors is figuring out other sensory things to put in place. So going to occupational therapy, seeing if they have some tools. We can also kind of, again, go back to communication and so forth. But similar to the last one, if it's more, we need more support around that, we want to kind of get support from a provider, because it can kind of be a very individualized, tricky one to work on for repetitive behaviors. For helping with possible self-care strategies, again, you can work with a provider on these, because sometimes reasons why kids are having a hard time with them is very specific to them and their learning style. In general, though, use all the tools we said before, use visuals, make a game of it if you have to, have everyone do it, see who can do it the fastest, see how many times we can do it, use it during playtime, do things like that, break it down into steps, add in choices. Do you want to do this fast or slow? Do you want to drink a small bottle of water or a big one? Like, try to add some choices in there for them too, and then practice it outside of that normal time. Okay, really quick, here's some resources. The book on the left is the one I kept talking about the whole time. I don't think you can see the one that has red on it very well, so I'll tell you it's Parent Training for Disruptive Behavior by the Ruby Autism Network, but it applies to children with all different diagnoses. The steps to independence and the Teach Me with Pictures are kind of just ways to break down tasks, which I know I've said a lot of times today. And then this is kind of just the Explosive Child, is kind of just a general behavior support. So those are good. And also, again, please reach out if you have a hard time accessing supports. I'll have my information here. I'm happy to try to direct you in the right direction and try to kind of help connect you with stuff. But that is all, and I think we're right about at time. Thank you. Since we're close, I think we're close to time. I will be here if any of you have specific questions, so I definitely will do that, just not like the formal Q&A here because of time. Thank you.
One like high level part is when you look at all the details, it all makes sense and ways to approach it. But what you typically will find with someone having something like what we have in this room, you're overloaded every day with just life and then whatever activities. So when you say I'm going to focus on one activity and research and go after, you're already doing 20 other things. So there's a lot of reality to say if you know elopement is something that may be tendency with this type of a background, and you say, here's proactive things to do, that type of behavior approach might help a group like this more than to try and everyone figure out afterwards and figure out your specific cause. You may still have a different cause, but if there was more of like that, angel sense or whatever's going down that path, that say, hey, this is likely to come in that area. These are already proven strategies. Proactively get ready before the elopement happens. Because afterwards, it just seems like we can't do all that. You're just overloaded.
Yeah. Agree. I think that's why like a lot of the safety toolbox and the angel sense are good things to put in place beforehand. Anything, visuals, changing how the room's set up, all of that stuff is good stuff to put in place beforehand. And those are things that hopefully can kind of target stuff before it happens. So hopefully we don't have to go into all the other pieces, because that is practically really hard when we're doing a lot of things too. So definitely, I think any of those things are the most helpful. I also think this is why working with a provider on some of these things, if it goes beyond some of these basic recommendations or goes beyond the toolbox, stuff like that can be helpful, so that they're doing some of that work for you and you're not having to figure it all out, because it is a lot to do.
I think we have time for one more. Is anybody burning for a question? Okay.
Thank you. So we really struggle with, and I think I wrote this in, with no or discipline. I mean, and she's a good child, but in dangerous situations like running elopement or anything like that, we'll say no, and she actually looks at me and laughs at me and then just goes. So even in the house, you know, just typical stuff. So any recommendations on that?
That's a great question. I meant to say something about no earlier too. So the most simple thing is try not using the word and rephrasing. So if the answer is no, being like, oh, hey, go over there. So we're not saying don't go outside, we're telling them what to do, right? This is for a few reasons. One is no, sometimes it's just a trigger with kids and kind of like a watch me, I'm gonna do it. Sometimes too, kids have a hard time knowing what to do instead. So very specifically giving them something else to do. So they're going to the door, be like, oh, hey, where's your toy? Go get your toy for me. Trying to redirect right before. Again, this requires us to kind of be on our feet and be a few steps ahead, which again is hard, but that's kind of a good first step intervention. Beyond that, I can answer more questions specifically, but does that make sense? Okay. Thank you.